In the blistering summer of 1847, along the sun-seared banks of the Brazos River in Texas, the ordinary turned to fate in the span of one desperate breath. Evelyn Grace, a woman hardened by grief yet not wholly undone, found herself pulled into a moment that would blur the lines between enemy and kin, tradition and mercy. That morning, the river didn't just run through the wilderness, it carved a path through history. At just 32, Evelyn had lived more than most women twice her age. Her small homestead, a one-room cabin perched on a rise overlooking the lazy curls of the Brazos, had once been meant for a family. But the fever that swept through the Cedar Ridge settlement 3 winters ago had taken her husband and their 2 infant children, leaving Evelyn behind, with nothing but their 160 acres, a milk cow, and the sharp ache of silence, while most widows returned east to the safety of familiar kin. Evelyn had stayed, unwilling to abandon the dream she and Thomas once sketched in sweat and calluses. Some called her brave, others thought her broken. The land was beautiful, wide skies, cottonwood groves, and wild grass rolling like green ocean waves, but it was also unforgiving. Once claimed by Mexico, now under the jurisdiction of the Republic of Texas, it sat uneasily between ambition and unrest. Comanche riders still ghosted the ridgelines, and settlers lived with rifles close at hand. Evelyn was no stranger to caution. Her father had taught her to shoot straight before she ever learned to sew, and her late husband had insisted she keep the rifle loaded above the mantel. But solitude had become its own kind of armor. That July morning, the heat came early, thick and pressing. Evelyn finished her chores before the sun reached its peak, then walked the narrow footpath down toward the river. A basket hung from her elbow, and at her side swung a hunting knife worn smooth from years of use. She knew this trail like the lines on her palms, every knot in the oak trees, every bend in the shade. But she also knew better than to get comfortable. The river was more than a source of water and fish. It was a highway used by both settlers and warriors alike. The water was lower than usual, the riverbank muddy from recent upstream rains. She knelt to check her fishing lines and was pleased to find a fat bass twisting beneath the surface. She had just begun to clean it when movement caught her eye downstream. At first she thought it was a deer, but then the figure resolved, a young Comanche rider, barely more than a boy, urging a painted pony toward the river's edge. Evelyn's breath caught. He was alone, which was strange. Warriors rarely traveled this far into settled land without others. She crouched in the shadows, knife in hand. Her rifle was back at the cabin, a foolish mistake, she cursed under her breath. The boy dismounted and led his pony into the shallows. But suddenly the animal reared and jerked away, scrambling to dry ground. The young man, caught off guard, stumbled and began to sink. Evelyn knew immediately what had happened. Quicksand stirred loose by the rains. It was deceiving, those patches, water shimmering just above a mire of deadly suction. In moments he was waist-deep and thrashing, each movement pulling him further under. She had a choice: run, hide, pretend she hadn't seen him. But Evelyn Grace didn't move to protect herself. She moved to save him. Grabbing fallen branches and tearing her apron into strips, she fashioned a crude rope. With steady hands, she called to him, her voice clear, commanding, human. Their eyes met across that dangerous water, and for a beat neither saw enemy nor history. Only survival. The moment Evelyn tossed that lifeline, she didn't just change the course of one boy's life. She altered the trajectory of 2 nations. 3 days after Evelyn Grace pulled the young Comanche boy from the river's deadly trap, the world around her shifted like a distant storm breaking. The morning began as most others, quiet, unnervingly so. Birds remained hidden in the trees, her milk cow refused to leave the shade of the barn, and the breeze, usually constant, had stilled like a breath held in suspense. Evelyn had been uneasy since the rescue, sensing that consequences would come riding eventually. That morning they did. It started with a low thrum, faint at first like thunder, too far away to be real, but it grew louder, steadier, and unmistakably rhythmic. Hoofbeats, dozens of them. She dropped the sack of grain she was carrying and ran toward the cabin, her boots sinking in the soft earth as adrenaline surged through her veins. She didn't need to guess, she already knew. Grabbing her rifle from above the hearth, she ducked beside the window just as a plume of dust crested the ridge that separated her homestead from the river bottom. Then they appeared, not one or two, but nearly 50 riders cresting the hill like a wave of painted thunder. Their ponies were adorned with feathers, hooves pounding like war drums. The riders were Comanche, proud, fierce, silent. They wore battle paint across their faces and chests, and their weapons gleamed like sunlit bones. At the front rode a man unlike any Evelyn had seen. Tall, broad-shouldered, his black hair streaked with gray and bound in a braid that hung over his breastplate made of bone and beads. His mount was a powerful black stallion, its sides marked with white handprints and symbols Evelyn didn't understand. But the man's presence said all she needed to know. This was a chief, and Evelyn suddenly understood who the boy she had saved must be. The warriors halted in formation just beyond the garden fence. Silence fell like a curtain between them. Evelyn stepped out onto the porch, rifle lowered but not discarded, her heart pounding in her throat. She did not speak first. From among the riders, one figure broke away, the boy, now freshly painted for war. He looked different, older somehow, his posture straighter and his gaze steadier. He stepped forward beside the chief and spoke in careful English. "My father is Red Elk," he said, each word deliberate, war leader of the southern Comanche. "He has come to speak with the white woman who pulled his son from the belly of the river." Evelyn's voice was steady, but her fingers trembled slightly on the rifle's stock. "I didn't know who he was, only that he was sinking and I couldn't let him die." The chief dismounted, his movements smooth and without haste. He studied her face for a long moment, eyes dark and unreadable. Then he said something in Comanche, his voice deep and almost ceremonial. The boy Kohana, as she now remembered, translated. "My father says to save the life of a chief's son is no small thing. Among our people, this is not forgotten. It changes paths." There was more. Red Elk spoke again, longer this time, and as Kohana translated, Evelyn realized the weight of what was happening. "He says you are now known as she who saves the drowning, that this name will be carried in our stories. He declares that no Comanche warrior will raise hand or weapon against your land or your life. From this day you are under his protection." The warriors behind him let out a call, part war cry, part chant. It echoed across the Texas landscape and into Evelyn's bones. She stood frozen, unsure whether to bow or speak or weep. No one had spoken her name with reverence in years, not since her children died, not since Thomas was buried under rocky soil. Now this war chief was giving her not just a name, but sanctuary. Red Elk stepped closer and placed something in her hand. A silver armband, cool and smooth, inlaid with turquoise stones that shimmered like pieces of sky. He said something, and this time Kohana didn't need to translate. "You are a bridge now," the boy said, "between two worlds, 1 foot in each." Evelyn nodded slowly, overwhelmed but steady. She could feel the weight of the moment, the choice it offered, the danger it promised. And she knew without question that her life would never be the same. The night before her decision, Evelyn Grace did not sleep. The oil lamp burned low on the table beside her, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn floorboards of the cabin she and her late husband once dreamed would be filled with laughter and life. But instead of memories tonight, it was filled with questions, hard ones. Ones that carved her insides with quiet dread. Outside, 10 Comanche warriors kept a watchful circle around her homestead. They spoke little, built no fire, and moved like sentinels cut from the prairie itself. In that stillness, Evelyn felt both exposed and shielded. Her hand rested on the silver armband Red Elk had placed there that morning, and the turquoise bear pendant from Kohana hung like a question mark against her collarbone. He had called her a bridge, but what did it mean to live between two worlds inside the cabin? Kohana sat near the hearth, carving wood with a steady hand, and the patience of someone born into a culture that understood too differently. His presence was a strange comfort, quiet, attentive, respectful. The boy who had once thrashed in quicksand now moved like someone who carried the weight of two legacies, the blood of warriors and the gratitude of survival. "You don't have to come," Evelyn said softly, breaking the silence. Kohana looked up, a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. "My father would say I do, but I would come anyway. You trust me that much?" He paused before answering. "I trust what you did. That tells me more than any words." The following morning, just as the first light painted the eastern sky in shades of gold and rust, Chief Red Elk returned. He was not alone this time. 20 additional riders accompanied him, older men, most of them with weathered face and the slow, confident movements of tribal elders. They did not wear war paint. Instead, they carried themselves like those who came to bear witness, not to threaten. Evelyn stood on her porch, back straight, rifle lowered but close, ready to speak the decision that had haunted her for 2 nights. "Great Chief," she said, using the words she'd rehearsed with Kohana, "I am honored by your offer to live among your people, but I believe I can do more good by remaining here on this land. This space between your world and mine can become a place where understanding begins. If I leave it behind, I lose the chance to help both sides hear one another." Kohana translated with clarity and care. As he spoke, Evelyn watched the reaction ripple through the gathered warriors. Some nodded, some frowned. 1 or 2 muttered softly in Comanche, the meaning lost to her, but the tone unmistakably wary. Chief Red Elk listened in silence. When Kohana finished, the elder approached Evelyn slowly. His eyes deep as canyon shadows studied her face. "To stay in the middle," he said in slow English, "is the most dangerous place. You will be too Comanche for your people, too white for mine. You may have no home." "I haven't had one in years," she answered simply. He seemed to consider that for a long moment. Then he turned and spoke in Comanche to the elders. A discussion followed, sharp at times but respectful. Kohana remained still beside her, like a tether between her world and theirs. When it ended, the chief faced her again. "My people will accept this path," Red Elk said. "But you will not sit and wait. You will walk between our fires and theirs, carry our words, learn ours, teach yours." Evelyn nodded. "I accept. There is a place east of here," the chief said, "called Harmony Falls. White people have built homes there, but that valley is sacred, promised to us for winter shelter. They build where they do not belong." Her breath caught. She knew the name, a settlement less than 3 days' ride. It had grown rapidly in recent months, attracting families and farmers alike, but also rumors of tension and armed patrols. "Some of our young ones want war," the chief continued. "We need truth. Go to them. Learn their hearts. Find if they will listen or if the fire is already burning." Evelyn's throat tightened. "And if they won't talk," Red Elk's gaze turned to flint. "Then we prepare." He placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "You will not go alone. My son and 2 warriors will follow close enough to guard, far enough to remain unseen." Kohana met her gaze, and something unspoken passed between them, not affection, not yet, but trust. "Respect. When do we leave?" she asked. "At first light," he said. "Wind waits for you." Only then did Evelyn notice the horse tied near her fence, a beautiful pinto mare with alert eyes and a war braid woven into her mane. Her name is Starfire, Kohana said. She knows how to carry messengers and how to run when peace turns to danger. Evelyn approached the animal slowly. The mare didn't flinch, only exhaled a long breath and lowered her head. Somehow that breath felt like a blessing. 3 days into their journey, the grasslands began to narrow into a shallow valley cradled between two worn ridges. And that was when the wind changed. The air, once crisp with prairie sage and sun-baked dust, now carried the sharp tang of wood smoke. Not the gentle aroma of cooking fires, but something heavier, scorched, urgent. Evelyn tugged Starfire to a halt atop the final rise. Beside her, Kohana's painted pony shifted restlessly. He said nothing, only pointed toward the east where black plumes coiled skyward, staining the summer blue heavens like ink in water. "That's no cooking fire," Evelyn murmured. No, Kohana answered. "Something burns too wide, too hot." From behind them, Bear Claw and Quiet Wind, the two Comanche warriors riding at a distance for protection, drifted closer like ghosts. One of them murmured something in Comanche, and Kohana's brows tightened. "They say the fire is in the heart of the town." Evelyn's stomach clenched. She had come to speak of peace, but it seemed Harmony Falls had already caught flame, whether by accident, violence, or carelessness she didn't yet know. They rode downhill cautiously, keeping to tree lines and low brush. From a hidden vantage near a bend in the river, Evelyn finally saw the settlement in full. It was larger than she'd expected, at least 30 structures clustered near a central square, log cabins, canvas tents, even the frame of a church under construction. But the scene was chaos. Flames consumed the far end of town, a general store, maybe a smithy, and settlers scrambled with buckets, blankets, anything they could find to contain the blaze. "I go as a traveler," Evelyn said quickly. "No talk of Comanche. Not yet." Kohana nodded once. Bear Claw and Quiet Wind faded back into the brush, vanishing from sight. It was just the two of them now, a frontier woman and her guide, no more threatening than a windstorm on the horizon. As they entered the town, no one stopped them. All attention was fixed on the fire, which had begun to spread to a home adjacent to the store. A woman face streaked with soot hair, pulled into a makeshift kerchief, shouted orders to a line of bucket passers. Without waiting for permission, Evelyn dismounted, tied Starfire to a nearby post, and joined the effort. Kohana did the same, though she caught the wary eyes of several townsmen as he passed. They worked for over an hour, side by side with the townsfolk. When the flames were finally contained, the townspeople stood panting and blackened, surveying the damage. 3 buildings gone, half a dozen more. Scorched, a family displaced. It wasn't until then that anyone asked Evelyn's name. "I'm Evelyn Grace," she offered, catching her breath. "Just passing through, looking for supplies." She didn't mention her pendant, or the silver band hidden beneath her sleeve. The town's leader introduced himself as Silas Whitmore, a tall, weather-lined man with a limp and a voice like gravel. "You've got the hands of someone who's worked fire before," he said, offering her water. "I've known too many hard summers," Evelyn replied, "and not enough neighbors to fight the flames with." Silas chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, you've earned a meal and a safe place to rest, at least for tonight." That evening, Evelyn and Kohana were offered space in the church in progress. The floors were still bare beams, but the roof held. As the stars blinked above the valley, settlers gathered around cookfires to share stew and story. Evelyn listened. She heard tales of debt loss and desperation, farmers from Tennessee who had lost their land to drought, craftsmen who'd risked everything on this last chance for a future. She also heard something else, fear. "Comanche have been seen in the hills," murmured one man. "Watching. Always watching." They say this valley belongs to them, said another, younger and sharper. But we paid the land office in Austin, got papers and stamps. What more do they want? A boy no older than 16 spat into the fire. What they want is to scare us off. But I say we fight fire with fire. Burn 'em out. Cohanna said nothing, but Evelyn saw his hands tighten around his bowl, his shoulders tense. Later, Silas pulled her aside near the edge of the square. His tone was low but respectful. Folks here are spooked. We've heard stories about raids. I don't know how much of it's truth and how much is panic, but fear spreads fast out here. I appreciate what you did today, but be careful what ears your words fall on. Evelyn met his gaze. I've heard things too from the other side of the river. They don't want war, not all of them. Some just want their winter camps back. Silas exhaled sharply, eyes flicking toward Cohanna. You're not just a traveler, are you? No, Evelyn admitted. But I came here to talk, not to threaten. He didn't respond immediately. I'll hear what you have to say, but not all men in this town will. As Evelyn returned to the makeshift church, the weight of the next day pressed on her like a storm cloud on the edge of the plain. Trust was scarce, fear was everywhere, and something was bound to break. Dawn arrived shrouded in a dense fog that crept low across the valley floor, curling between cabins and shrouding the burned-out husks of yesterday's fire. Evelyn Grace woke with a pit in her stomach. The unease wasn't just the stillness or the way the town's usual bustle had dulled into hushed tones. Something was wrong. She sat up on the church floor, eyes adjusting to the dim light, only to find Cohanna, already awake, alert, seated cross-legged beside the window. His posture was tense, head tilted like a wild creature listening for movement beyond human ears. They're coming, he said quietly. Before Evelyn could ask who, the door to the church burst open. Eli Whitmore, son of the town's leader, stood silhouetted in the doorway, flanked by a half-dozen young men with rifles drawn. His face was flushed, eyes wild with a sense of purpose that looked more like panic dressed in pretense. "Step outside, both of you!" he barked. Cohanna stood slowly, hands raised. Evelyn did the same, confused and alarmed. "Eli, what is this?" He sneered. "Don't play dumb. We know who you are now. You're not just passing through, you've been talking with the Comanche. Some folks saw you riding in from the west, with him." He nodded toward Cohanna like the young warrior were some rabid dog. "You're making a mistake," Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I came here to stop bloodshed, not start it." "Too late for that," Eli spat. "We're not going to let a savage and his handler lure a war party into our valley." With practiced roughness, they bound Evelyn in Cohanna's hands and dragged them through the square. A crowd had begun to gather, townsfolk still in night clothes, children clutching their mothers, wide eyes watching the spectacle unfold. Some looked confused, others afraid, but no one stepped forward. The captives were shoved down near the remains of the general store in full view of the open prairie to the west. Cohanna remained silent, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "What are you doing?" Evelyn demanded. Eli stood over them, hands on his hips. "We're sending a message. When the Comanche come riding to rescue their golden boy, they'll find him staked like bait. And if they try anything stupid," he tapped the barrel of his rifle, "we'll light this whole valley up." "You'll get these people killed," Evelyn warned. "There are children in this town. Families." "You think Chief Red Elk will care who started it once blood spills?" Eli's jaw tightened. "We'll fight. We'll win. This is our land now." But even as he spoke, a sharp whistle came from the edge of town. One of his lookouts, a boy barely old enough to shave, came sprinting toward them, panting. "They're here," he gasped. "Dozens of them. Coming fast. Painted up and riding hard." Panic rippled through the settlers like a lightning strike. Evelyn's pulse pounded. She looked to Cohanna. They're coming for you. We have to stop this before it starts. But Kohana's expression was grim. My father will not parley if he sees me bound. It is dishonor. He will take it as war. The settlers scattered. Men climbed onto rooftops. Women rushed their children indoors. Eli barked orders to take positions, but his voice now lacked conviction. This wasn't how he'd imagined it, and then the riders crested the ridge. Chief Red Elk led them, his stallion black as midnight and flanked by 2 rows of warriors in full regalia, their faces painted spears, glinting bows strung. They did not charge, they circled the town like a noose tightening with every beat of hooves. The air held its breath. Then Red Elk raised one hand and the riders stopped as one. He called out in English. His voice was calm but thunderous. You hold my son and the woman who saved his life. Let them go or face what comes. Eli held Evelyn's arm like a prize. They're spies. If you attack, they'll be the first to die. Evelyn stepped forward despite the rope still tying her wrists. Red Elk, she shouted. This was not the town's doing. It's fear. Let me speak with them. But the chief said nothing. His eyes never left the man holding his son hostage. A second passed. Then Kohana, never breaking eye contact with his father, began to speak in Comanche, firm, clear, unwavering. Evelyn didn't understand the words, but she felt their meaning like a current beneath her feet. This wasn't just a plea. It was a call for restraint, a son begging his father not to avenge but to listen. After a long pause, Red Elk raised his hand again. The warriors behind him shifted but did not move. Evelyn turned to Eli. You have a choice right now. Let us go, and this doesn't end in fire. I can't trust you, he whispered, sweat beading at his temple. You don't have to trust me, she said. But you have to decide who you want to be when this is over. A man who started a war or one who stopped it. Behind them, someone else stepped forward. Ruth Whitmore, Eli's mother. I've heard enough, she said, voice steady. Cut them loose, Eli, before you bury this town in blood. For one suspended breath, the valley forgot how to move. Eli Whitmore's rifle trembled in his grip as his mother's words struck him harder than any bullet could. Ruth Whitmore didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She simply looked her son in the eye, and her voice cut through the smoke and fear like a bell. Eli, she said again, low and resolute, cut them loose. He hesitated. All around him, settlers were watching, men with twitching fingers near triggers, women clutching children close to their skirts. Behind them, 100 Comanche warriors ringed the town like thunderclouds in formation, waiting for the first crack of lightning to fall. One wrong move would ignite the plains in flame. But Eli was still just a boy with too much pride and too little wisdom. His mouth tightened. They'll come for us no matter what. No, Ruth said, stepping between her son and the prisoners. They'll come if we give them no other reason but hate. This woman risked her life to save a stranger, and you've tied her like a criminal. She turned to Evelyn, then to Kohana, and with steady hands began cutting the ropes binding their wrists. I can't let you do this, Eli protested, his voice breaking. His father, Silas Whitmore, appeared at last, arriving breathless from across the square. His limp more pronounced as he pushed through the stunned crew. Son, stand down. Pa, I said, lower your weapon. Silas's voice was no longer gentle. You've dragged us to the edge of hell. Let this woman fix what you've broken if it can still be fixed. Finally, with shaking fingers, Eli lowered the rifle. Evelyn's hands were red and raw, but she stepped forward unshaken. She turned to Kohana. Will your father speak to me now? Kohana nodded. If anyone can stop what's coming, it's you. A white cloth, a stitched kitchen towel from Ruth's apron, was fastened to a branch and raised high as a flag of truce. Evelyn took it and began walking across the square, each step echoing louder than the last. Kohana walked beside her. Behind them, townspeople watched with breath caught in their throats. On the ridges, the Comanche waited horses, pawing at the earth warriors, whispering among themselves. As they reached the edge of the town, Chief Red Elk urged his stallion forward, flanked by his senior riders. He dismounted without a word, standing taller than any man Evelyn had ever seen, not because of height, but because of the silence he commanded. "My son lives," he said in English, "but only because of others. I came ready for vengeance." "I know," Evelyn said gently, "but you stopped. That means there's still something left to build." Red Elk studied her for a long moment. Then he gestured toward the center of the valley. "There. We speak where all can see." Together, Evelyn, Kohana, Chief Red Elk, and Silas Whitmore walked into the center of Harmony Falls. The settlers gathered cautiously. The Comanche rode closer but remained just outside the town's edge, their weapons lowered but ready. What followed was not a treaty written on parchment, but a covenant made in voices, faces, and memory. Evelyn translated where needed. Kohana filled the gaps, and Red Elk spoke with the solemn authority of a man who had buried too many sons. "We do not ask you to leave," the chief said, "only to honor what was promised. The northern valley where the snow rests longest is our winter shelter. Let us return there when the cold comes, as we have for generations. In return, we offer peace." Silas nodded slowly. "We keep to the south where our crops already grow, and if a man breaks the agreement, whether Comanche or settler, they answer to both sides." Heads nodded among both groups. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was something no one had believed possible just days earlier. Peace. To seal the promise, Red Elk offered Silas a carved peace pipe. In return, Silas removed the leather strap from his rifle and handed it over as a symbol of lowering arms in trust. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the Comanche turned to leave, not as conquerors, not as enemies, but as neighbors. And Evelyn stood in the space between them, no longer just a widow with a haunted past, but a bridge forged by mercy, bound by fire, and chosen by two worlds to hold something fragile, the hope that war might not always win. The days that followed the standstill at Harmony Falls were neither loud nor triumphant, but they were sacred in their stillness. The fires that nearly consumed the town were long extinguished, but the embers of change still glowed beneath every exchanged glance, every cautious greeting, every handshake that once would have drawn blood. For Evelyn Grace, those days unfolded not as a celebration, but as a kind of rebirth. She spent her mornings riding the valley with Kohana, visiting the marked boundaries where Comanche winter shelters would be restored and where the settlers would honor their promise to remain south of the river. In those silent rides, something unspoken grew between them. Not romance, not yet, but kinship rooted in survival trust and something both had long forgotten: hope. Evelyn was no longer just the widow who lived too close to danger. The townsfolk no longer whispered about her in church pews or watched her with quiet judgment from across market stalls. Instead, children waved to her in the street. Men tipped their hats. Women came to her with questions about the Comanche, about the land, about whether their babies would grow up in a place no longer haunted by war. Silas Whitmore, once weary and worn by leadership, now walked with a new burden, the understanding that peace isn't won in a single act, but kept alive through vigilance and humility. He and Chief Red Elk met once every new moon at a stone halfway between the town and the ridgeline. They spoke not as rivals, but as fathers, landkeepers, and men determined to honor the words their sons had nearly died to protect. Red Elk returned to the north in winter as agreed. His people camped in the snow-shadowed valley without conflict. And when the spring sun returned, so did his warriors, not with weapons but with hides, to trade seeds, to offer, and laughter. that no longer sounded foreign to the settlers who once feared them. As for Evelyn, her cabin remained untouched on the hill above the Brazos, but it was no longer a hermitage. Riders came carrying messages between the Comanche camps and Harmony Falls. She welcomed them all, white and native, outcast and kin. Some came with wounds deeper than the flesh. Others brought stories, music, language. All came in search of something that had been rare in the West for too long understanding. Over time, she became something more than just a bridge. She became a witness to the power of restraint, to the quiet revolution of kindness, and to the healing that begins when a woman chooses to stand in the gap rather than hide behind a wall. No songs were written about her, no statues carved, but her name was passed from mouth to mouth in both English and Comanche as the woman who pulled a boy from the river and in doing so pulled two peoples from the edge of ruin. On the first anniversary of that day, she and Kohana walked to the place where he nearly drowned. The quicksand was gone, dried up by the shifting river, replaced now by a willow tree growing in its stead. Kohana touched its branches gently and smiled. "Do you think peace grows like this?" he asked. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked at the sky, then at the land that had once held only ghosts for her. "No," she said. "I think peace grows slower, like roots under hard earth, but once it's in there, it holds." The wind stirred the leaves, and in the silence that followed there was no fear, only the sound of something new being born. In a land scorched by conflict and haunted by the weight of old wounds, the story of Evelyn Grace reminds us that true courage isn't forged in bullets or blood, but in mercy. She didn't set out to become a hero. She wasn't searching for glory or legacy. All she did was see a child drowning and choose to act not as a settler, not as an enemy, but as a human being. That single act, quiet, instinctive, and deeply humane, cracked open a hardened world. The American frontier, like so much of life, was built on lines between cultures, languages, skin, and story. But Evelyn stood in the space between those lines. She listened. She dared to speak peace when silence was safer. And in doing so, she proved that bridges are not just ideas, they are choices repeated daily, often painfully, and always worth it. Her journey tells us this healing doesn't come all at once. It's not one with a signature or a speech. It grows slowly like roots pushing through dry soil. It's earned in every conversation where we choose understanding over assumption, respect over retaliation, grace over pride. We may never face the stakes Evelyn did, but each of us has the chance to reach across a divide in our families, communities, or even within ourselves. Because sometimes all it takes to shift the course of history is a woman who sees a drowning soul and reaches out her hand. If this story stirred something in you, a longing for understanding, for healing, for courage in the quiet spaces, then you're already part of what we're building here. Frontier Reverie isn't just about the Old West. It's about timeless truths wrapped in dust, dusk, and firelight. Subscribe to our channel to journey deeper into tales of redemption, resilience, and the human spirit. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and help us keep these stories alive, because the frontier isn't just history. It's a mirror, and it's calling us home.